My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
The sound of praise for your Sunday morning.
The only one who could ever teach me.
Introducing Reverend A.R. Bernard of the Christian Cultural Center.
Was the son of a preacher man.
And Rabbi Joseph Potasnik of Religion on the Line.
The only one who could ever teach me.
Now, on Talk Radio 77 WABC, here's the Rev and the Rabbi, where faith matters.
Good morning. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard. And Rabbi, we want to give the bulk of the show to our conversation today. So,
Reverend, we have with us someone who joined us recently and is a great star in the Archdiocese of New York. I'm referring to Father Ryan Muldoon, who is the Director of Ecumenical and Interfaith Affairs for the Archdiocese. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Rabbi. Good morning, Reverend Bernard.
Good morning. Good to have you with us.
So this is Ryan, the Rev, and the Rabbi. All right. I like that. So there's much to discuss on this day. Firstly, you came back from a major trip to India. Some kind of ecumenical program was there?
I did. That's right. The tradition is that St. Thomas the Apostle, one of the 12, that he went to India. And he founded about 7 communities there that grew and grew. And in the state of Kerala in the south of India, there's a flourishing Christian population thanks to St. Thomas. Both Catholics and members of different Oriental Orthodox churches. And so it was a chance to go and to see the ecumenical landscape on the ground, to learn about the different churches that exist there. And might I say that thrive working together. You'd never know in the way that they collaborate, in the way that they live harmoniously, that there are very different Christian churches represented there. They really feel very much that they are one church, lived out in a diversity of experiences.
Where does the growth come from?
Local families. That state of Kerala has been Christian for now centuries, and the families are having children and they're producing faithful sons and daughters. We visited seminaries that were chock full of young men aspiring to be priests. It was uplifting.
A positive story.
That's interesting because we're struggling here in the West, especially in Europe and the United States, to get individuals into the priesthood. Is that still true, Father Muldoon?
It is certainly in the Catholic Church here in the U.S. and in the Western world more broadly. I teach in the spring semester up at our seminary here in New York, St. Joseph's Seminary at Dunwoody in Yonkers. And the men that are there are very fine. The only problem is there are so few of them. And we are struggling.
I'm hearing this in also rabbinical seminaries. A number of them, the classes are much smaller than they were in the past. So the question is, we obviously can't sit back and witness a decline. What do we do? What are some of the different approaches that are being taken? How do we get more people into the pews?
One of the things.
Wait a minute. You got two things going there, Rabbi. You got the pews and the pulpit.
And the priest and the clergy. But there seems to be something happening in sync here.
I think that the two problems are related. I think that if our pews were fuller, then our seminaries and our training schools for future clergy would also be more full. To me, it's a question about family life, especially in my own experience. Being raised in a faithful family is something that formed me very deeply. Something that our family was very close to the local church that we attended. We were involved. My father was and is a catechist, a religion teacher, and we were involved in different aspects of the local community, and that was formative for me. Through that experience, I met priests that were influential on me. I said, "Gosh, these are happy guys. They're fulfilled in what they're doing. I want some of that joy. I want to be like them." Just like a young man or woman who wants to be a doctor might know a doctor they want to be like, or a lawyer they want to be like. I met priests that I wanted to be like. And if we have families that are disaffiliating, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, I think families are struggling to find time for God on a Sunday morning between ballet and soccer and you name it. And as that happens, we're drifting further and further. And that proposal of this as a valuable way to spend your life as a minister, that proposal is being lost.
Are we witnessing the secularization of America? We saw it in Europe. We saw the historical and ongoing process by which religion, lost its influence over aspects of public and private life in European societies. And we saw the decline of religious belief, decline in practice, attendance, the increasing dominance of secular ideologies, and even the marginalization of religion in politics and culture and in social life. We saw that play out in Europe. And now, from the most recent statistics, only 10% of Europeans actually go to church, except within a Pentecostal evangelical context. And we're seeing that here in America. Are we experiencing the secularization of America?
So I would simply respond the following. The question, therefore, is what is it that the others are doing that seems to attract more, and why aren't the others who are not attracting emulate some of that spirit? I mean, if people are going to a particular denomination, what is it they're offering that's not being offered in other places? I think that's what we have to look. What is it we're not doing? Now, Reverend Bernard, I've been to your church. I can tell you it's a church that's overflowing. I can go to other congregations and I'll see many empty seats. I often wonder what is happening here that's not happening there, or vice versa.
When you toss it to me, if I may, I would not recommend some of the things that I see going on in some of these growing churches because it's not sustainable. I think the challenge is, and Father Muldoon, I'd love to hear you speak to this as well. The challenge is, how do we relate to the culture without compromising orthodoxy, without losing the fundamental respect and holiness, etc., that is built into the worship service and the worship experience? A lot of these ministers are, especially within the Pentecostal, charismatic, evangelical context, tend to be very, powerful personalities, very charismatic, motivational speakers. Mm-hmm. And does that build discipleship? Does that really build the church the way, in our faith tradition, Jesus intended? Father Muldoon, I'd love to hear what you have to say about this.
One of the things that I've experienced in my few 5 years as a priest is that we priests, we Catholic priests at least, get moved around a lot. And that's hard on the priest and that's hard on the people. And when I was leaving my last parish assignment in the northern part of Westchester County to come here to New York City just over a year ago, people were asking me, why is that? Why is that? And, there are a variety of reasons why that is, especially that we want young priests to get a variety of experiences before they settle down and become a pastor of a place. But I told the folks, I said, it's good that you don't get attached to just one priest, because it's not about me. It's not about Father X or Father Y. It's about our worship. And that can be led by very dynamic people, and that can be led by priests who, leave something to be desired. But to keep for us Christ at the center of our worship, that is sustainable. That is what has sustained the church. That it not be a cult of personality. One of the things that we've had a chance to speak about when you've generously invited me to be with you before is this phenomenon of being spiritual but not religious. This sort of individualism versus a communal religious expression. And that's something that concerns me, especially for folks my own age. that we, as in the Christian world, in the Catholic world, we have we're losing folks who think that they can go off and be Catholic Christians on their own, and they certainly can have a robust relationship with the Lord, no doubt. But I believe very strongly, and I think my tradition believes very strongly, that we need that communal element. We need one another. We need to be shoulder to shoulder with one another in that communal experience.
What I have found is there are a number of congregations that have moved the focus. It's become very much centered on social justice, doing for others. And I think there are a number of people who feel if it's only social justice, why do I need a church or a synagogue? I can be a volunteer somewhere. I can be, so to speak, a humanist. And that will allow me to do the things that you're doing, on that path of social justice. So I think we have to look at what is it we're doing and not doing. I find, and I've mentioned this to Rev many times, that people want to understand the richness of their tradition. What does my faith say about a host of things? But tell me first what my faith says. That's why there are a number of study groups I find that are growing. I find that people are going to congregations where the emphasis is on the teaching of the Bible, the teaching of the prophets, and not simply about looking at what is the issue of the day.
I agree, Rabbi. I think that people have enough voices to help lead them in the concerns of this world, but they're looking for something supernatural. The things of this world have understandably left them still hungry, and they're looking to be fed at a deeper level. If I may share, earlier this summer, in the middle of July, the U.S. bishops organized a national Eucharistic Congress for the Catholic Church in the United States. And just shy of 60,000 Catholics gathered in Indianapolis for a 5-day Congress in celebration of our belief that the bread and the wine, after they're consecrated at the Mass, become truly the body and the blood of Jesus. And it was an amazing experience to see almost 60,000 Catholics in Lucas Oil Stadium, gathered to be fed, gathered to be fed at that deeper level, gathered to be fed with a supernatural food and a supernatural message.
And not going to the raceway.
That's right.
But Rabbi, Father Muldoon points out something very important between the Protestant experience and the Catholic experience in terms of the service. A lot in the Catholic service or Mass is built around the Eucharist. That's not so within Protestant circles. Some Protestant churches only have what we call Holy Communion once a month, but the Eucharist is a central portion of every Mass, and I'll be very respectful and careful here, which means even if you have a priest who struggles with the homily, the Eucharist is still the reason for people to gather. Is that true? Am I right on this, or am I off base, Father Muldoon?
No, you're correct, Reverend Bernard, and believe me, we do struggle. Yours truly as well.
But you look at the Jewish service, and such a significant segment of the service is predicated on the Torah, the reading of the Torah, the understanding of the Torah. Also, of course, the prayer services, the morning, the additional services that are around it. The homily is important, but for many, it's coming to pray. It's coming to learn. It's coming to be with community. And if I also hear a great homily, then it's a bonus. But there are those who are not proficient in prayer, who are not proficient in the Torah, and they're saying, when I come, I want to hear a good sermon because the other doesn't do it for me. Mm-hmm. So, I think... Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's a big deal, because in the Protestant churches that are booming and are successful, here in the States as well as overseas, everything rests upon the ability of the preacher to communicate in a way that grips the audience makes the message relevant and Scripture relevant to their time, to their experience. And that's a problem sometimes because people will, they look, how's the preacher? Is he a good preacher? And that determines whether they go to that particular church or join that congregation.
So let's talk about something that we've discussed in part, and let's delve deeper. The intersection of politics and religion. I mentioned to you, I think I sent you a clip where a member of the clergy said, if you study sacred scripture, you have to vote for Kamala Harris. Rev, you sent me a clip that said, if you vote for a Democrat, you're not being a true Christian. Right?
Yeah.
So,
I'll let Father Muldoon weigh in on that first.
No, but I'm saying that, so has it eclipsed religion? Has it become the new religion? Where do you see this, this kind of confluence?
For us as Catholics, we our bishops, especially here in the United States, have led us in the understanding that we don't ever tell anyone who to vote for. And if there's a Catholic priest in a pulpit telling you must vote for person A or person B, that is not how our bishops have called us to lead our people. Our bishops rather have told us that we need to form the consciences of those who are in our pastoral care, and as priests to form our own consciences as well, to consider how some of the most pressing issues of our day, how our faith impacts how we view those issues, and consider what our faith has to say, for example, on questions of human life, on marriage and the family, on healthcare and education and immigration, and to consider what it is, the sacred teachings of the church, both Scripture and our church's tradition, how they speak to those issues, and to form our consciences, and then to prayerfully consider which candidate we find to be in conformity with that.
So you're not technically endorsing a candidate.
We never do that.
Yeah, and we do the same thing in the Jewish church. If we say this is a paramount issue, and there's a candidate who endorses that issue while the other candidate doesn't, we're in effect saying this is the candidate you should look at more seriously.
I think the problem is, Rabbi, that the clergy person represents the voice of God, supposedly. So if the clergy person gets up and says, if you vote for a Democrat, you're going to hell, you're anti-God, then the parishioner has to say, well, is he speaking on behalf of God, or is he sharing his own opinion, his own ideas? Mm-hmm. And for many, the clergy person is the voice of God. They speak the authority, supposedly, and knowledge of Scripture. And it creates a problem. There's a text that comes to mind, Father Muldoon, you're probably familiar with this text, where Jesus is faced with the idea of paying taxes, whether it's right or not. And of course, it was about allegiance to God versus allegiance to the government. And he says, render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and render to God what is God. But we can be in conflict with, what do we render to Caesar? What do we owe Caesar and government? And what do we owe God? That can be a tension, Father Muldoon.
It's very much a tension. And that's why we believe that we were called to educate our people. We're called to help form them in understanding what the church teaches, what Jesus himself taught in the pages of the Bible, and then to leave the decision making to them, not to.
And by the way, it's not always a clear-cut decision. You have to wrestle with it many times.
Very much.
All right. I think sometimes when somebody once said, anyone who's not confused these days is not thinking clearly. I think you really have to struggle sometimes to say, where am I going? Which candidate really is aligned more with issues of my faith that are central to my belief? And that's not always easy when you have certain candidates.
And
it is difficult because both parties, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but both parties, they favor different aspects of our ethics and our morality and our concerns, but there's always a conflict between the two. Do we just discount one party over the other, Father Muldoon?
You're correct, Reverend Bernard. There's no one candidate who fits the bill that we might build.
Right.
And so that's where the wrestling comes in, the critical thinking, considering each issue carefully, considering whether one issue is more important than another. And I just want to highlight for any Catholics who might be among our listeners and anybody who might be interested in checking out a document put out by the U.S. Bishops' Conference and updated each election year called Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship. That's our bishop's document on just this topic, on forming your conscience to be an educated voter. And it does touch on many of those major issues that I mentioned and several more.
All right, so I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the convention, of this past week, the Democratic Convention. One of the things I find very troubling, by the way, which is not the major issue for discussion here, is the clergy come in and are purely ceremonial. They come in, they offer an invocation, they're gone. The benediction, many of the people sitting there are gone, and then the clergy offers the prayer, which is a lesson to everyone. Don't do the benediction. Go for the invocation, because you don't want to be when people are walking out. But it's almost like window dressing. I mean, how many people actually listen, know the names of those participating, or care that much? But it's done at every convention.
Yeah, it's interesting that you raised that, Rabbi, because you have the Republican Party that presents themselves of having a special claim on God. And you will see in their convention more language about faith, about God, laced throughout the convention, throughout the speeches and comments, etc. Interestingly enough, this year the Democrats stepped it up, because usually that is not as prominent. And people are making decisions, just on that basis. And I keep throwing it to Father Muldoon, but please, Father, weigh in on it.
I'm just glad that there's prayer in that space. I'm glad that even if people might be on their way out, that there's prayer in that space. And one of the things that has saddened me is to watch people dissect the prayers offered. I understand, kind of picking apart some of the speeches, but I've seen a lot on the internet trying to dissect and nitpick some of the prayers offered. That to me is
so you're saying we should be happy this prayer. Years ago, the New York Times, prayer services were mentioned on the same page as the obituaries. And I remember somebody once said, it was a rabbi, said, why do they have to put them on? Why do we have to put religious services on the obituary page? Put them on the help wanted section, but not in the obituary page.
And thank you for tuning in. We'll be right back with more of the Rev and the Rabbi right here on 77 WABC.
Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, the Rev and the Rabbi. Talk Radio 77 WABC and the all-new WABCRadio.com.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Anyway, you mentioned how God was... Let me tell you something that I found particularly disturbing. I'll be very candid about this. There was no reference to the state of Israel at the Democratic Convention. There was reference to hostages. There was reference to people of God. But years ago, Rev, when you'd go to conventions, Democratic conventions, we'd mention our ally, our valued friend, we stand with Israel. You didn't hear that this time. That was not part of any of the presentations. And that to me was very troubling. And then when it was President Biden who said about the protesters, they have a point. And you looked at what the protesters were doing, what they were chanting and burning the American flag and the Israeli flag and saying, we want two state, but back to 1948, whatever it was. The chanting was no Israel. 2468, let's go back to 1948, just before Israel was created. So I looked at that and I said, as a Jew, it's particularly disturbing when we've reached a point where to mention Israel, that we always talk about as our trusted ally, as a special relationship we share, when you can't mention Israel, I think we're in a bad state.
Aren't we a product of our times? Even our politics is a product of our time. Everybody's concerned about the vote. That was a political convention.
Yeah.
And people are concerned about the vote. And there is a portion of the population here, I don't know what size it is, who are anti-Israel, who,
Right.
are in favor of the Palestinians. And you have representatives in the Democratic Party who also are anti-Israel.
Yeah,
so how do you bring that? How do you present that on that stage in that convention?
Well, I think you have to have certain principles. I think you have to prioritize what's important to you, where will you compromise and where will you not compromise. And if you're saying, I believe strongly in standing with Israel, and by the way, at the Republican convention, there was no problem saying that. But if you strongly believe that, then it seems that it becomes for you politically expedient, to kind of remove Israel from the equation and only hold on to the other side.
But you understand why in a Republican convention it was easy for them to say that, because that's one of the issues that they know many of their voters are concerned about.
Right.
They're concerned about U.S.'s relationship with Israel. So they're going to make sure that they play to the vote.
And if the Democrats don't say that, then they're saying it's not a burning issue with us.
Yeah.
It's not the way it used to be. Right?
Father Muldoon, a moment of silence.
Yeah.
leaving the question of the convention aside, I know from my interreligious work here in New York City, and the two of you certainly know this as well, that it seems like it's difficult for people to be both and. It's become an either or. Why? I don't understand why it is so difficult for us to say, I'm for the Israeli people, I'm for the Palestinian people, I'm against the suffering of the innocent, I'm against violence, and I'm against terrorism. That to me is very clear in my own mind, but seems increasingly difficult for people to say.
Father, October the 7th, one of the most horrific attacks, and both of you were, at the Nova exhibit. Cardinal took a stand and said, we have to stand with Israel during this time. He went to Israel as missiles were flying overhead. And then to see that there are those who don't even want to mention what happened on October 7th, that they don't want to invoke the name of Israel as the trusted ally, I found very, very painful, very painful.
But just to
and by the way, you can be both. You can support the causes as long as you do it with moral clarity.
Correct.
Right? No moral equivalence, but clarity.
And on that visit of Cardinal Dolan to the Holy Land, yes, went to Israel and went to Palestine, right? And visited with beleaguered communities on both sides.
Right. Reverend,
as we think of, it's a difficult thing because, look, I am clear that the loss of any human life, the life and dignity of the human person, no matter who they are, their educational, economic status, ethnicity, race, gender, it doesn't matter. We are to respect that life and hold life in high esteem. I think it begins there. We elevate, especially we as clergy, we elevate the conversations of the life and dignity of the human person. Everyone made in the image of God. And I can be against, and I'm speaking personally here, I can be against the way the state of Israel, the political entity, is handling the situation and still support and favor the Jewish people. And I have no problem. There is no contradiction as far as I'm concerned, because my value for all human life covers the Palestinians, the innocent Palestinians who have been hurt. My concern for the Jewish people, it upholds my faith tradition and my convictions as a Judeo-Christian believer, and at the same time, I can be critical of the state of Israel, the Israeli government, for how they may be handling this. I don't see a contradiction there.
I would just follow it up with a question: is what is Israel supposed to do when it is surrounded by those who are determined to destroy them? October 7th was the violation of a ceasefire that was in place on October 6th. So when people say we want ceasefire, they're in essence saying, let's go back to October 6th, the day before that horrific attack, that slaughter of innocent people. And when you have terrorists who place human beings, place their armaments and human beings in mosques, in schools, in hospitals as shields, then you're putting the response of Israel in a very difficult place, because what do? Do you simply say we can't attack because innocent people have suffered? Did we say that in any of the wars, that we didn't go to war because innocent people? We respect innocent life. We don't want to see innocent life. But unfortunately, when you're dealing with an enemy whose agenda is solely your destruction, it's inevitable. Mm-hmm. Sad to say, right? But what does one do on a pragmatic? You try to take every precaution to preclude the loss of innocent life. I think that's a moral responsibility.
Every precaution.
Right, every precaution. But it's very often easier said than...
And within Catholicism, there is what is called just war theory. Father Muldoon, you want to articulate that for us?
I know that we spoke about that in a previous episode when I was invited to be here, and I'll just focus in on one part of just war theory, which is the proportionality of the response, right? That the response to whatever has triggered this, that it be proportionate. And so the question now is, and I don't purport to have the answer, is whether or not the response on the part of Israel is proportionate to the attack. I'm not gonna venture a resolution to that question, but that's that's
a valid discussion. What is proportional?
Yeah.
But I think what we can all agree in, it is certainly totally immoral to seek the destruction of a people. We've met the families whose loved ones are being held hostage. What happened to their families and those who've lost loved ones? We have them at the Archdiocese, people who lost loved ones during the attack on October 7th. I think what you have to do as a country is prevent that enemy, that terrorist enemy, from doing it again. Now you can have a discussion, how do we prevent that from happening? But first, let's agree that it cannot happen again. So therefore, the word ceasefire sounds very nice, but I don't know what it actually means in reality.
And is there a reality for peace, Rabbi, especially in the situation of Israel versus the surrounding nations in the Middle East? Because when we sit down to the table and we have these discussions, you know, like the Camp David Accord, it was a discussion about peace by arming one nation against the other and creating a balance of power, which is not really peace. It's simply saying, okay, we have enough nuclear weapons that if you want to go all the way, we're all going to die. You know what I mean? Is that peace?
Well, that's part of the story. I think the rest of the story, there were opportunities to have peace when territories were offered and said, look, we're ready to give the following. We're ready to compromise, to make these concessions so we can have peace. And they were rejected time after time. So it's not just about the arm, it's about the willingness of people to live in peace. We all have that, share that blessing, may the Lord bless you and keep you. And you know, in Jewish tradition, there are criteria that have to be in place when you make the blessing. One has to be face-to-face. You don't do it on Zoom. You do it face-to-face. Two, you outstretch hands. You have to offer your hand, say, we want to live together in peace. Three, it has to be done with respect for the other, with respect for the rights of the other. And I think those criteria were in place when the blessing was created, those criteria should be operative today as well.
When we
Well,
ask,
go ahead.
when we ask the question what this peace might look like, I just think of the fact that the Catholic Church is on the side of the vulnerable because Jesus was on the side of the vulnerable. Any man, woman, or child, regardless of who they are, what they believe, the Church is on their side. But the Church has an understandable solicitude for the very tiny Christian population that exists mainly in the Palestinian territories.
And why is it tiny?
Well, my point here is that when we ask the question, what could peace look like, we're concerned about that population leaving. And when I was in the Holy Land with Cardinal Dolan in April, when we visited those small Christian communities, we heard that over and over again. Our people are leaving. Our children are leaving. Our young people are looking for a way out. Our young people are going abroad to study, and they're not coming back. And we believe that there's real value to having those Christian communities there in that holy land. And we're worried about their ability to continue to live there and to live there safely.
Let me throw a wrench in the works. And Rabbi, I'm sure you
never
appreciate this. Normalization is restoring normal diplomatic relations. And there's a process to that. And the first step in that process is diplomatic recognition, which means simply acknowledging the legitimacy of the other state and its government to exist. Mm-hmm. How do you get beyond the first step?
Well, we did it with Jordan. We did it with Egypt. But if you look at the Hamas charter, which has been in existence for some time, and by the way, in existence long before we ever talked about so-called occupation, it has in its charter the Jewish state does not have a right to exist as a Jewish state, and we are determined to destroy the Jewish people. If that's your charter, tell me how you normalize relations. There has to be recognition in saying we are both going to live with one another and work out these differences with full respect for the other's right to exist. If we could begin with that sentence, if we could begin with those sentences, then I think we have a great opportunity. And again, we did it with Egypt and Israel. We did it with Jordan and Israel. Why can't we do it with the Palestinian people? Because you need voices that say enough of this fighting. Israel has a right to exist. We have a right to exist.
And there has to be men and women of goodwill at the table. I think about a very passage that Father Muldoon, you're familiar with, I'm sure. Every Christmas we talk about peace on earth, goodwill towards men. One translation says goodwill, peace amongst men and women of goodwill. And that's really what it's going to take when you have people of goodwill willing to sit at the table and say, let's work through this, let's walk through this, let's find a solution. And unfortunately, I don't think we have enough people like that in positions of political power.
I wonder.
Rabbi?
I'm sorry, Ryan, you want to say something?
And we have to distinguish between Hamas and other terrorist groups and those individuals of goodwill that are in positions of leadership within Palestine. We were, and I don't want to. We don't have to go there, but we did meet some very good men and women who hold government office who clearly want to work together.
Well, trouble is the people in Gaza didn't want that Palestinian Authority. They wanted Hamas. So, they made choices, and unfortunately those choices have been injurious to their welfare. But I tell you what I do see here. We have been sitting together for about 30 minutes and expressing differences, expressing our views on particular issues within our respective faiths. And we didn't do it with hostility. We didn't do it with anger. We did it with an appreciation that the other has a mind that is not the same as my mind, has a view that is not the same as my view, but we can sit at one table and talk to each other and walk away from the one table and say, I have a friend. I have someone with who I can communicate and cooperate. If we could emulate that spirit in other areas of real life, political life in particular, maybe we'd be in a better place.
I agree. We've lost that ability to disagree civilly.
Yeah.
Well said. And I was going to, in the very beginning of this conversation, ask the question of Father Muldoon. You are director of ecumenical and interfaith, was it services? What's the exact title?
Dialogue, ecumenical and interreligious dialogue.
Yeah. So why and how long has it been that the Catholic Church has decided to establish an office and a director for such things?
Our awakening to the importance of these things came about 60 years ago, Reverend Bernard. The church in the 1960s went through the Second Vatican Council.
Vatican II, yeah.
Exactly, Vatican
Nostra
II.
Aetate.
That's right.
Finally, the 4 years of Latin that I took have come in handy. Finally, I've been waiting for the moment where I could use that Latin.
What does that mean? It means our time or in our age. And so Nostra Aetate is the document of the Second Vatican Council that talks about the Church's engagement with other faith traditions. And then there's another document, Unitatis Redintegratio, that talks about our engagement with other Christians. And so first and foremost, our engagement with other Christians is guided by our belief that we share one faith in Jesus. And with most Christians, we share a common baptism. And that binds us. That's not just lip service. That's something that is real, and that we need to discover the richness of our common belief and our common baptism. And then we recognize, in terms of our relationship with other faiths, that first of all there are other faiths that share our belief in the one God, right? Our brothers and sisters who are Jewish, our brothers and sisters who are Muslim. And that we can learn something from other faith traditions as well, that we are, as human beings, created in God's image and likeness, embarked upon this search for truth, with a capital T, and that we are duty-bound to follow that truth when we find it. And so this awakening, Reverend Bernard, to your question, happened especially with the Second Vatican Council that concluded about 60 years ago. It certainly is more ancient than that. It was sort of a recovery of what the Church ought to have always practiced, but didn't get right for many centuries. And so, especially here in New York, we are blessed with a tremendous religious diversity. And we believe, Cardinal Dolan, our Archbishop, believes to his core that we have a responsibility here in New York to prioritize our relationships with other Christians and with those of other faith traditions, that we are at our best as New Yorkers when we are working together. And to something germane to what we spoke about earlier, this with the rise in secularization, that we're more strongly poised to fight for the position of religion broadly when we come together and we unite our voice.
I think what you just said is so important, because the reality is that America is becoming more and more religiously pluralistic. Religious pluralism is taking over our nation. And when we find that common ground, that we are, as I say so often, that religion brings a moral value consensus to society. And morality and ethics seems to be a constant with most religious belief systems, especially the major systems. We need to come together because there is a shift in moral and ethical values in our society that's redefining things that we have held dear. You know, marriage, sexuality, reproductive rights, all of these things are on the table. And if we don't have a moral value consensus around these things, we're going to continue to see this shift take greater hold on our society, and we're going to be marginalized, which is something that's, we see happening right before us. How do you respond to that?
I think...
Father?
Given what we share today, it's imperative when we write the history of religion, we don't just examine what was. I think what Father Muldoon said, the extraordinary partnership that we have in confronting the challenges of the day is something that is so reassuring. And I think the way God intended it to be. And I'm very proud to be part of that movement that says I can't do it alone. I need friends. I need family. And we have that. So yeah, we can look at the past, and a shameful past, in many of those chapters, but we shouldn't simply end. It's like the cardinal will say, it didn't end with Good Friday, right? Continue. It didn't end with slavery in Egypt. Continue with the Exodus. We have to be very... Go ahead.
Go ahead. I want to throw a question out because we don't get a chance to talk this much about religion.
Are you saying when Father Ryan is not here, we don't talk about religion?
Yeah, but not like this, not extensively. But I'm curious, in your traditions, all right, speak to the principles of individual rights and personal autonomy, because a lot of the secularization is being pushed by this idea of individual rights, that I can make my own decisions apart from some spiritual or religious authority. What do our religious traditions say about individual rights and personal autonomy? Rabbi?
Father's looking at me like he just wants to answer this immediately. Go ahead. I'll respond. But I won't.
Go ahead. Father Muldoon, go ahead.
We believe that God gave us a freedom that he intends and hopes for us to use to choose the good, right? That our freedom is not meant to be this unbridled freedom, although we do have the ability to choose between good and evil. But we believe that the proper use of that individual autonomy is to use it to choose the good. I explain this when I'm teaching to Catholic young people. The parish I worked in had a grade school, and I would say, God made you to live with excellence. God made you to choose what is good, and to have that make you flourish. And so I think we live in this age where autonomy is misunderstood as this ability to choose whatever. But I'd say that our Catholic tradition would say that God wants us to use that to choose the good, to live with excellence.
So do I lose my right when I decide that I'm going to choose a particular identity or relationship? Do I lose that right? Do I surrender it to your religious belief system?
No, I think what we say in our tradition is there is freedom of will, but before you execute that freedom of will, take the following criteria into consideration. You look at, for example, the pro-choice movement, and you say, look, there are certain criteria in our faith before you make that decision. So you have freedom of will, but that freedom is also predicated on certain principles, because freedom doesn't come without responsibility. The whole story of Pentecost is about the giving of the Torah, the giving of law. And it's called, and this was the liberation of a people, but a liberation that came with the acceptance of a moral code. So I think personal autonomy is a nice concept, but it's not personal unless you take into consideration. It's not autonomy in our tradition, and I think yours as well, if the autonomy doesn't include what values you hold dear, what values are important to you. Then you can exercise your autonomy. It doesn't just mean discard everything else because you want to do it.
Well, let me ask you a question.
We have about 2 minutes left. Ava Anderson has returned.
It's a 2-minute question. Don't eat up the time. Who determines? When you say choose the good, who determines what's good?
We have the Torah. We have the Talmud. We have a code.
And we have objective truth as revealed to us in the person of Jesus, and then expanded upon in the tradition of the church.
I love that. Objective truth. That's the Torah. I wish we had some more time, gentlemen.
Hey, once again, let it be known. You got it from us. But
okay.
I just want to emphasize as we come to an end, and Ava Anderson, our producer, is in the studio and looking at me very sternly saying, you better end on time. We don't come here seeking to convert the other to our belief. 3 people stand proud, steadfast in their reverence for their own and also respect for the other. And I think that is such a great place to be. I wish we had more conversations with people of different faiths discussing some of these issues, because it's something that I think girds us with the inner strength to deal with some of the complexities of the day. All right?
I couldn't think of a better way to wrap it up, Rabbi.
Well, I thank you, and
Thank you both for having me.
you know, we got to do this again. I always say it was Bishop Sheen
Yes,
who used to say,
Archbishop Fulton Sheen.
yeah, Fulton Sheen used to say, when a young child enjoys an experience, he says, "Mom, Dad, let's do it again." Right?
Amen. And he'd be happy that we're on the radio.
Yeah.
Amen to that.
Thank you.
So thank you for tuning in another Sunday right here on 77 WABC for Incredible Conversations of Consequence. You like that, Rabbi?
I love that. With the Rev, the Rabbi,
And the Rabbi.
and Ryan.
And
Father Ryan.
Absolutely. Father Ryan Muldoon.
The three R's.
Next time. God bless.
Thank you.